welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. 2 Kings 17:17 reads, "And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger." The verse setting is the reign of Ahaz in Judah, one of the worst to ever sit on that throne. The occasion was worship of Baal, the ancient Canaanite pagan god. Solomon, who built Israel's first great temple for worship to Jehovah, followed that in later years by laying aside the religion of the one true God, so forcefully delivered to him by a long line of godly ancestors, and building another to Baal within sight of the first. Now, that's no small thing. Baal worship struck in devilish fashion at the very righteous core of everything that was moral in the Ten Commandments, and thus all of God's law. Human life is precious. Morality teaches us to value the welfare of others, but worship of Baal held no such compassions, and it also incorporated in worship service that hideous heathen practice of temple prostitution, whereby young women were encouraged to dedicate a year or more of selling themselves for the benefit of the temple and its maintenance. Ahaz was some 10 kings down in the list of kings from Solomon's day, and the degree to which heathen practices had seeped into Israelite culture had worsened with the passing generations. Causing children to pass through the fire was an actual event. There was a horribly ugly image to the God created, having a human form but a bull's head, outstretched arms, into which living children were laid and then rolled downward into the bronze belly of the god. A furnace in the image's interior was heated red hot, and as a screaming child was engulfed in its awful fate, people played flutes and kettle drums to drown out its little cries. Ahab undoubtedly did this to his own son in the temple Solomon had built, thus the blossom of the awful seed planted centuries before. It's easy for us to gaze back over these terrible scenes from ages past and think, how barbaric, how heartless. Indeed it was. When bonds of courtship and holy marital love are sacrificed so wantonly and foolishly for a few pennies, a few moments of pleasure, how is it possible for families to have the strong bonds so essential to the wholesome, nurturing atmosphere children so urgently require to be sound inside? How can any marriage truly be happy? What shame and misery those ancients surely brought in themselves. And yet, are we so different? Through the centuries, Satan may change his clothes, but never his ways. So Baal survived into the Greek pantheon, where he was named Zeus, with licentious worship practices, little change from the bygone Canaanite days. When he migrated to being a Roman god, he was renamed Jupiter, and the pagan practices associated with him there went on. Evil practices never go away. They simply evolve. We may ask in wondering voices of those ancient Israelites, how could you let a bull statue into Israel? Maybe most of us could never do that. We know too much science and have too many natural explanations for things to convince ourselves pieces of metal have life and govern rain and thunder. But if our lives bear the same fruit, are we not really worshiping the same things? Today's parents all too often sacrifice the emotional and mental well-being of their innocent children on the altar of foolish, selfish passions. God meant families to have a father and a mother. Over and over and over, science has proven healthy, stable children desperately need both. But all too often, people who should know better drift into relationships with no real commitment and produce children that are then heartlessly sacrificed to the gods of business, lust, drugs, similar vices, pursuit of pleasures of the flesh. The strongest bastion of the solid virtues that make good parents is Christianity, as Christ described it, and saints for centuries have lived it. Have you talked to God today?
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.